Welcome to Leadership Bites with myself, your host, Guy Bloom. This is a leadership podcast where I have conversations with colleagues, I chat with guests, and sometimes there'll be just me talking. You can connect with me at livingbrave.com, and when you enjoy the episode, subscribe and please tell everyone. I do watch movies, but probably I have a wide selection. Netflix and Amazon Prime have been my
saving grace, right?
They really have. I've become just. I've started to look at series that have got. When I see 9 series, I go, right. I don't really, and if I'm not attracted to it, I go, but it's got 9. It's been going for that long, right? So I watch it, and 99 times out of 100, it's brilliant. So it's almost like a product on Amazon. If it's got 5,000 reviews that are positive, but it's dead cheap, I go, well, it can't be that bad, And then I get it, it's brilliant. So
I've started to want to know what other people think. That's cool.
Well, I'm following the wisdom of the crowd. That's what I'm doing. So, listen, lovely to have you on this episode of Leadership Bites. I always start these things off with getting an introduction because I know who you are. So, just Bonnie, introduce yourself to the audience.
Yes, Guy, thanks for having me. I'm Bonnie Low-Kramen, and I wrote a book called Be the Ultimate Assistant off of my experience working for 25 years with the actress and Oscar winner Olympia Dukakis. So I train high-level executive and personal assistants all over the world and the leaders they support. The assistants of the world are mostly women, so I spend my life in rooms of women who are working very hard to support CEOs and entrepreneurs and celebrities and, just executives of every level. A lot of work.
I found this, yeah, exactly. And I find this really interesting because I focus as a career, as a trainer, as a coach, as a developer of leaders. And I just suddenly, you came across my LinkedIn stream somehow as these things do. And I thought, well, that's the obvious person to speak to, isn't it? Somebody who's actually, spent her career and also works with people who are supporting, might be the wrong word, but are working side by side with people at the highest level. And I wanted to kind of lift the curtain a little bit. So we were talking about it earlier, which is you had an article published in the Harvard Business Review, which is executive assistant the right job for you? And I reckon that's a great place to start with, just starting to understand maybe the caricature or the from looking through the window but not really knowing the job, what it is that people might think it is, to the reality of actually operating in that kind of a role.
Mass media doesn't do the role of assistants any favors, because when so many people think of the executive assistant relationship as something like what happens in the movie The Devil Wears Prada. They picture the abusive executive and the bedraggled and abused assistant. And in the majority, that does happen, of course, in the world, but the majority of assistants out there are resourceful, some of the smartest people you will ever meet. There was a headline back in the early 2000s that read, "These are the people you want next to you during the apocalypse." Because during the pandemic, they actually were among the best prepared for what happened when the world blew up, because the way they think, Guy, is they automatically have a plan A, but they need a plan B and a plan C and a plan D, because they're the ones who are going to get the phone call if the flight gets canceled or it's raining and it was going to be an outdoor event. The assistants are the ones on the front lines who, when there are problems to be solved, they are the champion problem solvers. In 2022, they have supreme technology skills coupled with extraordinary EQ, emotional intelligence, and radar. The people in offices call them the office Google. They if they don't have the answer immediately, they no is rarely in their vocabulary. They figure it out. They're the ones to do whatever it takes to get the job done. Now, in the Harvard Business Review article, I point out that the profession is 93 to 97% females. So while they may be, in fact, the right arms to their leaders, the backbone of the company, the eyes, the ears, they hold a very important role. They also are women who are not known to toot their own horns about it. They are not known to go around saying, hey, I'm awesome. So a large majority of leaders and even HR don't really have an accurate picture of what they truly do. And that's the truth.
So this is this is why I love doing podcasts, because I say it every single time, so I'm just repeating myself, which is, with a bottle of wine and the right food, this is a whole weekend topic. I love this. But there's an exercise that we do on very often that's done on leadership programs, but it's the spaghetti exercise. And what you do is you get some spaghetti, and the teams have to build a tower, a spaghetti tower. And generally, what happens is, that people want to build it as high as they possibly can, and then they have to put a marshmallow on top, and it has to support the marshmallow. So it's hilarious, because it either sometimes smaller with a bit of foundation is better than having something very tall. You stick the marshmallow on top. Blah, blah, blah. So when you watch I think it's the TED talk on the topic, what you get is a description of who fares well.
Okay.
So you'd expect architects to do quite well, etc. Children do brilliantly. Executives do usually very poorly, unless you put an EA in with them.
Wait, how many times have you done this exercise? You have to tell me.
Oh, hundreds of times.
And that is consistent? Yeah. That you need an EA in there?
If you put an EA in there, they moderate the voices. Mm-hmm. They're often listened to equal to, if not more than, a lot of the other people who are trying to hold space. Mm-hmm. They adjudicate. They navigate people's politic, etc., etc. So it's funny that you when you said these are the people that you want next to in an apocalypse, that absolutely plays out. I think it's absolutely
I've never
brilliant.
forgotten it, because it makes so much sense. They're like the MacGyver, if you know that TV show.
Yes,
if you get a group of assistants together, we could have tell your favorite story about when you saved the day. I got a police escort for Olympia once, and they didn't know me because she was stuck in traffic and needed to get to a speech with the governor present. And my job was to communicate credibility on the phone to the state police. Are you kidding me? I mean, to this day, I still cringe, and that happened like 30 years ago. I got the police to open up a dry cleaner's store at 9:00 at night because we had forgotten, let me take some responsibility here, for getting her dress out that she was leaving in the morning on a plane to London for the Steel Magnolias premiere with Lady Diana present, and Charles and the whole royal family. So this dress was pretty important. Yeah, I did that.
Well, that's great, isn't it? And I think that's, we were, again, speaking before, and in my space, somebody can say, oh, your team of trainers. And I'll go, well, yeah, they are trainers, but really they're facilitators, and they're part counsel, and they're part mentor, and they're many, many things. Mm-hmm. So I guess I'm really interested in that sort of the jigsaw pieces, I guess, of what a good EA is. And that would be good to maybe hear if somebody said to you, maybe not so much what do I need to work on, but what does it take?
Yeah.
What are the components of a good EA?
The best EAs out there, the top EAs that I have in my mind, they are super smart. They are highly organized, and an organization is not the same for every assistant. It's whatever's right for you. I've got the 5-minute rule that I teach. The top assistants can find, and it doesn't matter where they are. They could be in a movie theater. They could be in a restaurant. They could be in the bathroom. It does, because they have their phone with them. It doesn't matter what folder, what phone number, what file, what piece of information, you can get it in 5 minutes or less. That's the 5-minute rule. They are cool in a crisis. They are the people who, when everybody is flipping out around you, it's the assistant who is, calmly thinking to herself or himself, all right, what do we do? What's our plan? What do we do now? Car didn't show up. What do we do? Plane is canceled. What do we do? That's how their brains work. They are super tech savvy. The top assistants may or may not have a college degree. In the HBR article, I talk about how in the Great Resignation, the new trend, it used to be that somebody put in a bullet on job descriptions that a college degree was demanded, was an expectation.
Prerequisite.
Yeah, prerequisite. Sorry, thank you for the word. And now it's being called preferred, college degree preferred. So all education doesn't go to waste, but a college degree that was gotten 20 years ago does not matter as much as a workshop that was taken last month or last year in Microsoft Office. Ways to speed people up. The top EAs see themselves as strategic business partners who are by their executive sides in meetings, and they have a voice. They have opinions that are being sought after and respected, which is very different from decades ago and the image that many have. But this is how the role has evolved, mainly because of how the workplace has gone. It used to be a very hierarchical relationship, and now it's more peer-like. And mainly because we all only get 24 hours in a day. So the question becomes, what are we doing with that time? And the top EAs save their executives time, and time is money, as you know. I mean, that isn't hard to imagine. So how do they do that? They do that by having access to their email inbox and being able to handle certain emails that don't need to be handled by their executive. Some EAs actually sit in on meetings in place of their executives. And, as Olympia used to tell people, why are you talking to me? Why do you want me in that meeting? You want Bonnie in that meeting because she knows better about my schedule and, these things than I do. And then in one of my students supporting her CEO executive in an emergency situation that he had with his family, he decided to name her the acting CEO of the company. And that happened. And she's still with the company many years later. And it lasted for 6 months. The leadership team questioned him, why you're executive assistant? And essentially the CEO said, I trust Debbie, and I know that she will implement the things that I am tasking her to do. So these are people who are proactive, take initiative, and are pretty fearless about the unknown, because my goodness, they are, every single day could be something very different. And last thing, every EA I've ever met who treats this as a career and not a job loves that every day is not the same. They love that no day is ever the same. They love the variety of it. They love the unpredictability of it. These are not your 9-to-5ers for sure.
It's a great description, and I love that idea of an EA stepping into that CEO role during a position, because who knows more?
That happens.
Who knows more about the
right.
absolute oversight, more maybe than anybody in a vertical, and who knows the politic and the personalities, and who has to navigate the egos more.
Right. And, I know your audience are a lot of leaders. And so let me just say that in front of assistants, I'll ask them, I'll say, is it true that you see and hear everything? And they absolutely, like big nodding heads. And then I ask them, is it true that people will say things to you that they would never say to your executive? And that is a big fat yes. So leaders need to know that people are, the instinct is to not be the messenger to the person in charge, right? So who do they talk to? They talk to the person below the person in charge. And that makes that person more valuable, the EA. So for leaders who weren't quite aware that people were talking to your assistant, it's important that you know that and access your assistant in that way. That just gives you more leverage, actually.
I wonder if they'll ever. It's and I don't know why it's jumped into my head. And
What's that?
It's even a silly question, really, because I just wonder if they'll ever. We have the C-suite, don't we? That's kind of, the CEO, the CFO, the whatever, the CIO. I wonder if there'll ever be a CEA.
Well,
as in, I am the EA with the board, and I'm on that level of that level.
That's an interesting point. And in many companies, they call that person chief of staff or chief administrative officer. So that role does exist, but Guy, your instinct is right. It's not as common as I think it should be. And frankly, in this post-pandemic environment we're in, with no leader having been prepared for a workforce that's partly in the office and partly at home and, hybrid and not ever having everybody in the same place at the same time, physically, that is, I believe what I see happening is a trend towards the need for that person, a person who's paying attention to the connection of the entire staff. And so in many companies, they choose to call that chief of staff.
So I think the caricature of somebody in that role that I hear when it's, like any role can have a caricature to it. And the one here might be, it's a secretary with a big title.
Yeah.
That might be a caricature. It's basically a secretary or a PA with a title. And of course, people can fulfill the caricature, can't they? They can not be that good at their job.
Yeah.
They can be operating at that level. So I have trainers that I know that want to be considered facilitators, but really they are just trainers. Right? It's PowerPoint and present, but they like the big title, but they're not really fulfilling the role. So people, I understand that where these things can flow from, but there is something about seeing it as a career, having it as a vocation. So not a job. I mean, we can all fall into a job, but there's something about the person that is heading for the C-suite, that is heading for, I'd like to be on the board, maybe as an IT director, or I'd like to be at board level as an EA. And I wonder if somebody had that aspiration, if somebody was 18 and was right, how do I get there? Which is a question anybody could be asked. How do you get to be on the board? How do you get to be at that level? Some of it might be education. Some of it might be just going to have to get out there and do it. But if somebody said, look, I know it's the impossible question, Bonnie, but if I wanted to be at that level in 18 years from now or whatever it is, how would I run at it? What would you say?
It's about mentorship and surrounding yourself with people who are doing it and who have made it. And so for 11 years, I've been teaching my 3-day workshop called Be the Ultimate Assistant. And this class attracts the highest level assistants in the world. And so I love it when I get 20-somethings in this class who are ambitious. Because as I already said, the profession is mostly women. And women in general are not socialized to have huge ambitions. We can have medium ambitions. And I'm talking in generalized, socialized messages that we receive. And so for young women to get a fire lit under them for ambitious goals, I delight in that. And I think the secret is finding people, trainers, coaches like me, and other many great people in the business who are teaching classes about going to the top level, not mediocre, not because there are, of course, many levels. In most companies, entry level is at the receptionist level, and that's considered an administrative role. And then there can be a progression. But in most roles, there are progressions of a growth in the role. And of course, many assistants aspire to be the assistant to the CEO and have that seat at the table, but not all do. Not everyone is ambitious and wants to have that level of responsibility that's on call 24/7. And, it's heavy duty hours and you wake up in a cold sweat at 2 a.m. because like, oh my gosh, that email wasn't sent. Not every assistant wants that level of responsibility, but the ones who do need classes to sharpen their saw constantly. It does mean a commitment to lifelong learning, and it does mean connecting on LinkedIn and really connecting with the people who are in the echelon that you want to be in, and learning from them.
I can see how that makes sense. I've got a question. Again, it's just when we do these, we don't plan out the questions, and something just jumped into my mind, which is, I imagine that what might surprise people is how much an EA, a top flight EA, not the highest paid one in the world. I'm not talking about that, but generally speaking, top flight EAs, because I wouldn't say top flight CEOs, what can they earn? Well, they can earn millions. But generally, to work as an executive at a C-suite, you could imagine that they earn this. Bonnie, what's the, listen, if you're at the top upper quartile and you're in a, you've got a senior role in a largest organisation, an EA could expect to earn in that kind of bracket.
If it's a big...
What are we saying
If it's a big corporation and you're supporting a CEO or a C-suite executive, it is not uncommon, especially in New York, San Francisco, Chicago, the bigger markets, the bigger geographic markets, to be making $100,000 to $125,000 US. If a person has, and that's like 10 plus years experience, if someone has, this is based on my experience and based on what my students tell me and my communications with recruiters. If a person has 5 to 10 years experience and they're in a medium-sized company, and so it's not as large a responsibility, that's going to be between $80,000 and $100,000. And then someone with less experience could be between 60 and 80. Historically, the role has been underpaid in general because women are not great at negotiating. And, I'm a woman and I am, guilty of that myself. And so I learned the hard way. So I train assistants to negotiate. Men are much better at it. The assistants, though, in the C-suite who have responsibility for direct reports, that's what they call them, people who are reporting to them, they have supervisory responsibility. That's a special skill that not everybody has that skill. And those skills demand that salary would be between $125,000 and $150,000. And the more experience, more responsibility, if the person travels, if they have responsibility for the family as well, and that's called an EAPA. And by the way, in the UK where you are, EAs in America are referred to as PAs over there. And my information about the UK is that the salaries are not as high in the UK as they are in the United States. And in the United States, in smaller markets, the numbers, the dollar figures I just named are lower. And they shouldn't be, because in my view, job description equals money. So it really shouldn't matter whether you're in New York City supporting a CEO in a large company or in, Minneapolis. It should be, in my view, the same amount of money. And there are some recruiters who are looking to make that move. And then, assistants go up from there. There are assistants out there making $200,000 plus. Some of the top assistants to very, billionaire people types could be making 300,000 plus. And they are most definitely viewed as part of the ELT, the executive leadership team.
Yes.
Yep.
Okay, I've decided to retrain.
You want a new career, guy?
Do you know what? And I love that. I love that there's a sense of, do you know how much a good EA can earn? Yeah. I think that's, and actually, or do you know how much you should be earning?
Right.
Or, I think that's another thing. So I have come across people that I have said, I don't, and I can spot this it could be in any role, you've outgrown where you are because, I get paid well.
Yeah.
Yeah, but the age you are and where you could be, I mean, if you love where you are, then that's a beautiful thing. But actually, I don't know if you're aware that in this local area that you are, but go here, go there, that's where you could play, if you're as good as I think you are. And I think that's exciting that people could actually go, because those are decent sized salaries.
What that requires, Guy, is a mindset of confidence and leadership. And I train my students to be the CEO of themselves, that they're in charge of their own careers as opposed to being victims of it. Because the uniqueness about being an assistant is that the definition of the role is dependent on the person they're supporting. And my goodness, that is not one size fits all. That the person who's supporting you it's going to be a whole different set of preferences and responsibilities compared to supporting somebody else. And there are many top assistants who are supporting multiple executives. And, I know you're into psychology. Imagine what an assistant needs to do to recalibrate her or himself for 5 different executives, for their personalities, for their styles, for their communication styles. If you can put yourselves in those shoes for a moment, that's an extraordinary set of ability to be able to straddle all of those different personalities. That's not easy. I supported Olympia and her husband, Louis Zorich. So I had 2 very different personalities, set of preferences. And Olympia would acknowledge she was definitely the more high maintenance of the 2. But, I did it with 2. There are some amazing assistants out there doing it with 3, 5, and even more.
I think that navigating the ego and the politic and just the context of people's, their fears and, people can have a brave face when it comes to the vertical that they're in charge of. But I sometimes think that the EA is often going to be privy to the knowing that you're being held to account by your CEO in a manner that you're maybe not showing everybody else. I know that you've just been in a conversation where you've had a strip taken off you because of poor performance or poor behaviour. And I know, I know.
Yeah.
There's lots of things to navigate people's bruised egos and people's all of these things. I imagine
who supports CEOs, that's a very lonely job. That can be a very lonely job. So even though she or he is an EA, they're not the same as the other EAs, because the EA to a CEO knows everything. And you're so right. It's about, just because you do know doesn't mean you need to say what you know. And so we talk about how EAs get asked inappropriate questions all the time. And how do they respond to that? Because discretion and confidentiality means so much in this role. And those are the kinds of things I teach assistants and talk to leaders about, in the way to maximize this relationship.
Yes. I imagine that when you've got 2 or 3 people that you really like and you want to engage with and you want to really help, and they're asking you, look, I need to know this, can you tell me? And just, there's no Machiavellian stuff going on here, but it's just, having to, again, navigate people's needs, their wants, their fears, their timelines. And it must be, again, I think it's one of those things that when I work with EAs and I'm just planning to get a group of execs in a room to do a diagnostic, one of the things I say is I can only begin to imagine the complexity of trying to get these 6 buggers in the same place at the same time. And you see, they look at me and they go, you've got no idea the level of negotiation that's going to be required. And understanding that when they say, well, I've got to do this and that, my ability to go, I understand, but let me tell you that on your agenda, this is actually a level 1 thing, and I need you to put that to a level 2. So they're holding these people to account. They're pulling them up on what they don't want to do and saying, listen, you're going to have to attend. And, and it's a fascinating role, I think, of
and getting more interesting all the time, actually, I think.
Yeah. And why do you think that is? What's the catalyst for that?
The catalyst for it getting more interesting is because most assistants, well, the statistic is that by the end of 2022, 25% of all the workforce in the United States are going to be fully remote. That's a huge number of people who are now all of a sudden, well, not all of a sudden, but in 2 years' time, almost 3 years' time, working exclusively out of a home office. So these EAs are still being the backbone of the company. They still are the right arms to their executives, but now many of them are doing it partly from home. Most top EAs are coming in. They're saying that a 2-3 combination seems to be a great one. 2 days in the office, 3 days at home, or 3 days at home and 2 days in the office. So a hybrid situation. There are new rules about the workplace now that didn't exist pre-pandemic, which is even the most experienced assistants are having to take a fresh look at how they're doing their work. Travel is being handled differently. Event planning is happening differently. Vaccination requirements, masking requirements. Who has new needs because they are living in long COVID, the ramifications of what just happened, I don't think we can underestimate. And as usual, it's the executive assistants who need to know these details. And so it's making the work very interesting. It's also making them even more valuable to the organization and the leaders they support.
So talk to me about, there's a phrase around talking truth to power. And I love this idea that when, I think I'm quoting you correctly, saying the quiet parts out loud, if I've said that, got that right. And I think I'd just like you to bring to life what that means and potentially what it entails.
As I've been writing and researching my new book called Staff Matters, which will be coming out at the end of 2022, I am very aware, keenly aware, that a major part of the problem in our workplace, when problems exist, it's because the constituencies of the workplace are not talking to each other, that the silos exist, that staff are not talking to leaders. They don't want to be the messenger. They're talking to assistants. So assistants have a key role as a constituent. There's the HR department, which in many companies is in chaos right now because of the demands of this workplace. They were already burdened pre-pandemic, and now they have to be infectious disease experts, and they have to be developing plans for active shooters and bullying, and my goodness, the list goes on. And then you've got recruiters out there who are trying to place people in companies. And I'm aware that there's not enough talking going on to one another, and there's a lot that's going unsaid. Now, so that's why I think that we need to get the courage to say the quiet parts out loud. In February, I did a TEDx talk called The Real Reasons People Quit. And the real reasons are because of poor management and toxic work environments. Staff who are being bullied, staff who are being discriminated against, sexually harassed, not paid properly. Those are the real reasons people are quitting. But when they go for an exit interview, when they write their letter of resignation, Guy, they're not necessarily saying the truth about why they're leaving. Many of them will say, well, I found a better opportunity. This is not a fit anymore. It'll be jargon around it. And of course you understand that because they need a letter of recommendation. They wanted another job. I get it. But at the same time, the silence is not helping us move forward in this workplace. We're just going to keep repeating the cycle of abuse if we don't address it out loud and shining a light on it. Because this great resignation have shown us that people are leaving companies in droves. And we hear from employers, perhaps you talk to leaders who are wrestling with a talent shortage and, services that cannot be fulfilled because there aren't enough people to do those jobs. This is a complex problem, but essentially, I think we can all do a better job at saying the quiet parts out loud. What do you think?
Yeah, and there's something then. Well, I think that's really interesting, and I think there's something about in that role. It's almost the EA is very often the junction point, the crossroads, the where all the roads come together, at that point. So they are, in some respects, the cultural pulse taker. They probably have on a diagonal cut throughout the business, who speaks to everybody and sees everybody. I imagine that is a place of a capacity. Duty is an interesting word, perhaps, but having the bravery to bring the truth into the room. And to be able to say, either when asked or to offer it, well, here's my observation. And here's what I hear.
And I train assistants to ask their leaders, I saw something in the meeting. May I tell you what I think? Can I tell you what I saw? And I urge them to get the buy-in of their executives to give them the license to say it and to set that up from the beginning. Because historically, leaders are not, they don't know. Assistants may see and hear, they do see and hear everything. The challenge for them is to start saying what they're seeing and hearing. And that's where I come in.
And that's interesting, isn't it? Because a seeing and hearing isn't necessarily a judgment. It's an observation. Correct. The capacity to offer data
context
is different to then, well, what's your opinion? Well, my opinion's a completely different thing. That definitely happened. Now, if you want my opinion, then you can ask me that, but that's a second question.
May I tell you what I think? Olympia Dukakis would say to me, Bonnie, this was very much towards the beginning of our work together. She would say, I may not always do what you say, and I may not always agree with you, but I always want to know what you think. And that guy was freeing to me because I'll never forget it. And it gave me the license every time that I thought my radar went up and I saw something that she ought to know, then she may not always like it that I was telling her, no, we really can't go to that hotel. The production company is saying it's too much money or whatever. But I had the permission, the license, the runway to do it. She told me, she came right out and said, I always want to know what you think. So I work with an assistant 20 hours a week, and I tell her the same exact thing, and she does. And I think leaders need to hear that, because women especially need to hear that in an overt way. I really want to know your opinion. There's not going to be a price to pay if you tell me the truth. And I don't know if you have found this, the difference between men and women, but I have found with women, you really need to be overt about encouraging them to say what they're seeing and hearing, because they may not always trust that, is it really going to be safe to do that?
I think there's a group of men, that tip of the spear kind of alpha personality that doesn't require permissions probably to do anything. They'll just crack on and take the repercussions even if they're wrong. And then there's the group below them that I think are very much in that similar space. So I think when we say all men are better at, I go, no, that's like saying all people from France are.
Right.
No. But there is a percentage. There are 100% like that. They'll ask for a pay rise even if they're not worth it. They'll make a suggestion that feathers their own nest, etc., etc. But the majority, of the people I deal with say to me, "Have you met my boss?" Or, I don't know if I'd really want to say that. Or now there's always a few lunatics that don't care and off they go. But the majority sit with doubt and uncertainty, and they don't have the permission, or they don't want to rock the boat. So I think the majority I see in that space. But I am intrigued by the difference between offering an observation and offering an opinion, because you may have an opinion, which is why you're offering the observation, but the reality is to be able to say, "I'd like to talk to you about what I saw. I'd like to, would you be interested in seeing that?" is not to be confused with "this is what I think about it." But I think I may have seen something that you didn't, and I want you to know it, and then you'll do with it as you see fit. Well, what do you think about it? What I think about it is a completely different
But to say those sentences, Guy, requires some bravery.
Yes.
And it also requires understanding who you're talking to, and there needs to be a trust that's built up. Olympia and I were together 25 years, so the more I was right, when you build up the capital of being correct about saying, I got a sense that so-and-so was kind of upset over what just happened. And when I turn out to be right, then that creates even more trust for the next time. And it's like, so what do you think, Bonds? What do you think? And that's how these relationships are built. So it's like everything.
I like that. I think there is something that says as you're coming up the ladder, you have to calibrate your own radar as well. So if you to have a calibrated radar, you have to put yourself at risk of having feedback that says, "Well, actually, I don't know if you're right, and this is why," or "Blimey, you are," or "We'll soon find out." But you have to put it out there to have some success or failures with your own observations, and then, as you say, to learn. "Oh, I did offer that." And on reflection, mental note to self. So you've got to learn to calibrate it to get good at, to get good at it, and then, and the trust comes.
If leaders can honestly understand that the world in general, many people in their orbit may be protecting them from the truth, and I've had occasion to. Then let me just finish that thought. If they believe that that's true, then they need to have access to that information. If they're going to run a successful company, they need to have all the information. And if they're aware that people are protecting them, I think it's a leader's obligation to make their people psychologically safe to say the truth. And, I've had occasion to speak with leaders face to face to say, "Are you aware that staff often feels afraid to come to you to tell you the whole truth about what's happening?" And they seem a little surprised. And I've said, "Do you want to know?" Because they think you don't want to know. Do you want to know? And to a leader, they say, "Of course I want to know." I said, "Well, then my advice to you would be to do something to let them believe you."
I'm coaching somebody at the moment, and there's a saying in the UK which is the Queen thinks the world smells of paint, because wherever she goes, there's somebody 3 meters in front of her painting everything.
Oh,
So it's to make it look fantastic, right? So that's the
interesting.
That's the idea. The Queen
I've never heard that.
The Queen must think the world smells. No, it's a UK thing. The Queen must think the world smells of paint, right? Because everybody's beautifying everything before she gets there. And I just doing some work with somebody the other day, and one of the dynamics was, I think everybody likes working here. I think everybody thinks we're a great management team. I go, "Well, how many people are there?" "Well, there's about 500. "Well, then no." "Well, how do you know?" "Well, I don't need to know, because you'll have a distribution curve. Some of them will think you're brilliant, some of them will think you're rubbish, and there'll be a group in the middle that they're relatively ambivalent, and they probably go from really quite liking it through to, well, as long as they're getting what they want. But look, there's going to be a distribution curve. Why? Well, because you haven't got 500 people who think you're brilliant. At least 10 of them think you're bloody awful. Well, why would they think that? I don't know. But at least 10 of them will. And that's very simple. It's very easy for people in a leadership role. I think you're right. You've hit the nail on the head. They get paid homage to. People are very careful how they offer things. The vocabulary is tested, and she doesn't like to hear that, so I tend to say this. And then over a period of time, can you really trust what you're hearing? So I think that EA, very often the HRD's role is to do that as well, but the EA is in this beautiful space to say, what I hear out there isn't the same as what I'm hearing in here. The vocabulary you're being offered isn't the same as that I'm hearing when I hear them talk in that space. Do you want to know that? I think the value that an EA can bring through not being, what's the word? Not being an informer, but to offer, the insight and the observation, because you can't see the back of your own head. So it's a fascinating thing. So listen, I'm going to be alert to time, because there's a whole load of places I could go to just in conversation, but I think what you've done is rather elegantly brought the reality of just the weight of the role, the scope of a role, the value of a role, and how, like all things, there's the worst version of everything, but then at the best, it can be one of the most valuable roles in an organisation. And I think you've really, really brought that to life.
And there's a saying out there that to leaders, that if you don't have an assistant, you are one. So,
boom, you finished on a big one there. That's fantastic. If you don't have an assistant, you are one.
And that's so true. I mean, we all have administrative tasks to do in our lives. It really, just because a leader knows how to do their own correspondence and calendaring, and does not necessarily mean it's the best use of their time. And that would be what I would argue, that time is money, time is precious. The pandemic taught us that life can change in a heartbeat, man. And we better get a handle on this to do this better.
Honestly, that's the title of your book. If you don't have an assistant, you are one. That's got to be a book title, isn't it? Or at least a T-shirt. Holy schmoly. You need a website with merchandise on it and stuff like that.
Yeah, I can't take credit for it. Cameron Harold said it.
Doesn't matter.
It really goes right to the heart of what this all is. But I really appreciate the opportunity to talk this through and to reveal to your audience the power of what this partnership could be.
I love it. So listen, from me, from anybody that's listened, this has been an absolute joy. So just stay on the line with me for a few more moments. But from me, thank you so much. It's been a genuine absolute joy. Thank you. That's it. So I hope you enjoyed the episode. Please share so others get to hear about us, and subscribe so you keep up to date on new episodes. Also visit livingbrave.com if you want to connect with me and find out more about executive coaching, team effectiveness, and changing culture. Oh, and of course you can buy my book Living Brave Leadership on Amazon. So on that note, see you soon.